Welcome back to the 3C Media YouTube channel. My name is Craig Crash. Alongside me is Brandon Scott, otherwise known as B. Scott. Glad he's feeling better. We're glad to have him back because it's time to talk some IndyCar amid all of our basketball conversation with the state championship going on, the state finals, for girls this past weekend, and then of course the NCAA tournament and conference champions coming up. There's a lot of basketball conversation, but we got to get into racing. We had the Daytona 500 a couple of weeks ago. We had a great final race at the Auto Club Speedway for NASCAR, and finally IndyCar.
That was really good.
It was a good race. And hey, you know what? I told you about Kyle Busch. He was a driver to watch. I mean, we knew he would be. He always is good. But getting into RCR. Getting the job done.
18 straight seasons with a win.
Yeah.
18 straight seasons. That's an impressive streak.
For sure. And so now it's time for IndyCar to get going.
Here we go.
The start of the season. And, we were talking before we hit the record button here about this season. And I think, we'll touch on it a few times throughout the course of the show. But I think this might be the most wide open the championship has been in a while. Where I legitimately don't know. I mean, a couple of years ago, we would have, Dixon would have been a front runner, Newgarden would have been a front runner. Those were kind of been the easy championship picks, and you were kind of like, okay, maybe somebody else throws their hat in the ring. Those two have had, I don't want to say disappointing years, but definitely they've been kind of lost amid the other contenders that are out there. And so now,
I don't think you could say Joseph Newgarden had a disappointing year last year as a runner-up.
He did have a disappointing middle of the season. He had to really haul his rear end into those last few races to get into a good position, especially after that disappointing second race at Iowa. It's just more or less to say that there's no clear cut a lot of time. Heck, we've had a question on here before. Scott Dixon or the field, like Joseph Newgarden or the field, and I don't think you can do that anywhere close to that this year. There's so many people out there that you could choose from as far as who you think could pinpoint for this championship.
Oh yeah, this season is going to be exciting. You could just tell that things were starting to shift last year with the amount of new winners that they had that were occurring last year, or every week there was a time feels like every week it was a different winner, and that's why you didn't see the guys that won, like Will Power wasn't always on top of the podium.
Well, he only won one race last year. Yeah,
he only won one race because there was so many different winners last year, and it was exciting to tune in every race, and it was somebody else up front. It wasn't the usual suspects, which, that's great when that happens as well for, drawing in the fans. But to grow in everything, to be able to have these younger drivers that are new, or somebody different up there, it really made things very exciting. And I think that's going to be the case again this year.
Well, looking at the offseason to get everybody caught up here on some of the notables and reminders to everybody out there. First and foremost, Alexander Rossi, he's going to Arrow McLaren. That's kind of the big news. He leaves Andretti Autosport after spending pretty much his entire IndyCar career there. Kyle Kirkwood will replace him in the 27 at Andretti Autosport. Tony Kanaan announced that his final race will be at the Indy 500 this year. That will be his final race. Alex Palou is still with Chip Ganassi after all the craziness that was last season, where where Ganassi had announced the extension, and then he was like, well, glad you let me know about that, because I didn't know. And so he's still with the team, kind of, like we mentioned again off air, one foot in the door, 1 foot out the door. Santino Ferrucci will be in the number 14 for AJ Foyt Racing. I put that down as a notable just because I like Santino Ferrucci. I want to see him succeed.
Give him a consistent ride, and Santino Ferrucci is going to turn some heads. Yeah. I firmly believe about Ferrucci. He's one of the better drivers out there, and he just needed a legitimate chance. It'll be interesting to see how he can do in AJ Foyt equipment, because it hasn't always been the most consistent equipment out there. But I think Ferrucci puts them in a much better situation this season, because he's a heck of a driver, man. don't sleep on Santino Ferrucci.
Yeah, I think he'll be fun to watch. And also the schedule this year not really any different from last year. The only thing that's different is the Detroit races on the streets of Detroit, not Belle Isle. That's really the only
That's going to be
change.
fun.
Yeah, that will be
It's a
interesting.
it's a bummer because Belle Isle is always it's a big deal, but I think it's going to be really cool to see it on the streets of Detroit. Kind of like how we're going to see NASCAR on the streets of Chicago this year. I think capitalizing on the popularity of what they've seen from having a race on the streets of Nashville is going to be very similar to making this move. But Belle Isle was always a great one, but changing it up a little bit, it's always good too.
Well, we mentioned him a little bit earlier, and the kind of the shock of last year. We had talked about the season prior how Will Power, was kind of the odd man out at Penske. Like, it was one of those kind of things where you're like, well, we don't really. It's kind of like Aaron Rodgers. Like, you don't really want to force him out, but because if he's had so much success, but he's kind of has it run its course because you didn't have really anywhere to put Pagano, and it was all the kinds of things that were moving around. But he comes back strong, wins the championship last year with just one win, so it's kind of a question mark of what can we expect from the defending champion? And I don't think there's any reason to think he won't be in contention again. I don't think he will win, but I do think he will be in contention. I mean, remember, like we said earlier, he only won one race last season. He won the title based on just flat consistency, 9 podiums, 12 top fives, 13 top tens, and the schedule, like we said, is essentially the same. So it's not like, oh, well, this race is this way, this race is that way, they're adding this track and that track. It's pretty much the same schedule. It's kind of wild to think, things got so bad in 2021, a year where he still finished ninth in points. Like, he still had a top 10 points finish. That we forget that, that was the only year he finished outside the top 5 in points with Team Penske. Since 2010, which is his first full season with Penske, he's finished top 3 in the points 8 times, with top 5. He's been in the top 5 of the points 12 times and has 2 championships. Like I said, I don't think he repeats, but there's no reason to think that he can't be in the mix again this year.
Yeah, Will Power, the individual that we have an I have an unspoken rivalry with. Um, yeah, I mean, there's no reason he won't be in contention this year. I mean, with Will Power, it's if he he is his own worst enemy, in my opinion. He can get inside his head sometimes. Like, if he has a bad race, like his equipment's falling apart, motor failure, something goes wrong, it he can sometimes let that spiral a little bit out of control and go on a few race stretch where he just doesn't have quite the races that he is capable of having. Um, if he can find that consistency that he did last year, find his way to the top of the podium again, there's definitely no reason he can't be in contention. I think just like last year, we saw a lot of new winners, a lot of different winners each race, so that allowed him to use that consistency to win the championship. I don't know. I mean, if that was a winning formula last year, if it'd be tough for him to pull that off again, but if he can find that consistency again, there's no reason he cannot be in contention for the Astor Cup at the end of the season.
Now, I do want to make mention, we talked about 2021 a little bit. After that 2021 season where Alex Palou was just phenomenal the whole season, I remember a lot of the talk on our podcast was, the changing of the guard, the passing of the torch. This is some of the other drivers that had won that year kind of made it seem as if, like, okay, we're kind of seeing these young guns take over, and so we're seeing kind of this new crop of IndyCar talent, which is still obviously there. But it kind of begs the question, do we take seasoned veterans or young guns? Because, now if you go back and kind of reverse, your thinking a little bit, 2 of the last 3 champions have been drivers that were over 40, with Scott Dixon in 2020, Will Power last year, then Alex Palou, the sandwich there. So it brings us to our hot or cold question. If you don't watch the show or this is your first time watching, I give a take and we say whether it's a hot take or a cold take. My the hot or cold take today is the 2023 IndyCar champ will be over 30. And for me, and this, I waited until I finally kind of parsed through all what I was going to do later in the show for our championship prediction to actually finish this question for myself. But I do think it is a hot take. Of the 28 IndyCar champions crowned, 15 were over 30, 13 were under 30, so it's pretty much an even split there. So it's pretty even. But oddly enough, Will Power became the oldest champion last season. I believe he was
Really?
42. Yes. So he's the oldest champion. I mean, Scott Dixon, I think, made that record 2 years prior, and then
Okay,
he
I was
just
about to say, I
broke
was
that.
like,
Yeah. Well, because
Dixie's up there.
right, yeah, because Dixon, I think it would have been. Cause I think he's 41, so he would have been 39, maybe, or 39 or 40 when he won, and then Dixon is, or
Okay.
sorry, then Power's 41. However, 7 of the last 10 champions, oddly enough, have been over 30. Joseph Newgarden won 2 championships while under 30, and then of course Alex Palou. So I'm gonna actually go with the trend. I feel like the season is wide open, so that's kind of why I'm gonna go play the odds. Like I said, I think anybody can win this year. It's about as wide open as we've seen it. So it kind of alludes to my championship prediction later on the show, but I think the champion this year will be over 30. It's kind of one of those things where, Alex Palou had such a great season. We've kind of been hyping up, the Pato Awards, the Colton Hertas of the world over these last couple years, and these veterans that those guys that we kind of grew up watching in IndyCar have still come out and been like, hey, you know what? We're still here. We're still going to go out and win it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question just because there's such good talent at throughout the age range. But I am going to say hot, mostly because majority, I think, of the challengers, the drivers that will be in contention, are over 30, even if they are just barely over 30. Um, because really, when I look at the drivers that I think that are going to be in contention, the only two that I can pick out that would be in contention, there's only two that I would pick out that are under 30. Um, so I guess when I look at that with the odds and everything, I'm going to say over 30, just because the odds are greater that the champion will be over the age of 30. But man, it's tough, um, especially considering we're not sure what certain drivers are going to look like this year, being with new teams. That may direct you to where I think the champion's going to come from. But or there's just so many unknown factors. I mean, it could be another season like I've already alluded to, like last year, where it really didn't take a whole lot of wins. I mean, Will Power had one win last year because there were so many different winners throughout the entire season. Um, but if it turns into, we're not having a bunch of different winners week after week after week, and it becomes a grouping of drivers that are always in contention week after week, it could lean towards another driver. So, but I do believe the champion will be over the age of 30, um, but potentially just barely.
That's why I posed the question that way, because obviously, if I would have said like over 40, like really only 2 drivers
Yeah,
are
but
over 40. Over
yeah,
30 is kind of just like that, because when I think young gun, like I think of like rookie 22, 23, 24, 26.
I mean,
Like
it
they,
makes me feel so old because some of these drivers, and I'm like, oh yeah, they're super young, and it's like, no, no, they're 30 now. I'm like,
well, because
what?
like one of them that surprised me, because I knew he was close, but I wasn't sure if he was over, was Joseph Newgarden, and I mean, we talk about it every time we bring him up. He had that whole like run with like Sarah Fisher, that we kind of forget about. That we're like, oh well, that didn't exist. He's always been with Penske, and nope, it was a while that he
Well,
was.
the one that gets me, Connor Daly.
Oh yeah,
To me, Connor Daly is still that young guy like crashing on James Hinchcliffe's couch, and he's 31. It's
yeah.
like, oh my gosh,
where does where does the time go?
what is going on?
um
When did I get old? I mean, there's gray up in there. Jeez.
So when we look at the season, the 2023 IndyCar campaign, we're going to look at what team we're looking forward to, what driver we're looking at the most, what race we're looking forward to the most. So when I'm looking at what team I'm looking at going to into 2023. I've got my eyes on Chip Ganassi Racing, not because I think it's gonna like they're gonna be a team that's gonna have a driver in contention. I mean Scott Dixon obviously will be, but I think this is a pivotal or a one these next 2 years actually I think are very pivotal for Chip Ganassi Racing. Because when you talk about the powerful teams of the sport, obviously they're right up there at two. I don't know if anyone's putting them at one over Penske, but they're definitely fighting for that number two spot. And you look at those other teams, all three Penske drivers finished in the top five in points in 2022. Arrow McLaren is kind of the darling of the offseason, coming into the season with O'Ward, Rossi, and everyone knowing that they're going to have Pilot in 2024. So even if
And don't
Arrow,
sleep on Rosenquist. Don't
right.
sleep on Felix Rosenquist either.
Right, but even if Arrow McLaren has a disappointing year this year, I think the fact that that Pilot is coming makes it to where we're like, okay, like let's say Pato O'Ward doesn't finish in the top. Well, I mean, I don't think he finished the top points this past year, but let's say he still doesn't contend, and let's say Rosenquist has a bad year, and let's say Rossi still struggles. Like they'll still have the buzz going into 2024 with Pilot on the way. Scott Dixon was solid as always, but he carried a winless streak through a good chunk of the season last year. Marcus Ericsson won the Indy 500, didn't do a whole lot else. He led the points for like a week after that, and then he kind of had a lackluster rest of his campaign. I think still finished like sixth in points, but Alex Pilot followed his title campaign with a fifth place points finish and all the contract drama. So, I mean, this doesn't get marked down as a bad 2022 by any stretch, and this team is far from fading, but they could be post Palou with a lot of interesting questions going into 2023 and 2024. Will Scott Dixon win his second Indy 500 and contend again, which I think that's pretty easy. Can Marcus Ericsson take that next step? What will the last season look at like? I can't talk today. What will the last season at Ganassi look like for Pilot? There's a lot of questions going into it because once Pilot leaves, we talked about it a little bit earlier. Is Dixon? Dixon's going to retire at some point. Who's carrying the banner for Chip Ganassi Racing? Because once Dixon leaves and once Pilot leaves, there's not a whole lot, at least there's a lot of unknown there that we're not entirely sure of. So I think this season and next season are going to be really pivotal for this race team to figure out kind of what their identity is in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, Ganassi is definitely an interesting team to keep an eye on because, I mean, you look at Dixon, Pilot, and Ericsson, obviously, but you also remember they're also running a fourth car that's got two part-time drivers. You got Takuma Sato running the ovals and rookie Marcus Armstrong running the street and road courses. So that's interesting. And then the fact that they also brought in over the season a kind of behind the scenes move that, doesn't always take front and center because of, we're always talking about the drivers and the cars and everything, but behind the scenes, they made a big move with the hiring of former Arrow McLaren team president Taylor Kyle, who's now on board with them. So that's going to be an interesting move because we saw he had some really big successes at Arrow McLaren with Pato here in the past few seasons. So, and obviously it's because McLaren is going in a different direction, and that's another team to keep an eye on. That's actually my team to watch because this year, I mean, the addition of Alexander Rossi, I think you're going to see a resurgence from him. And the fact that also McLaren is just throwing so much money into this program and giving it the funding that the proper funding that it needs. I mean, McLaren's not going to jump into anything and not be competitive. If we've learned anything from watching Drive to Survive with Zach Brown, I mean, we know he's in it to win it, and that's just the history of McLaren racing. So Arrow McLaren this year is going to be a very, very interesting team to watch, and we always, like I said, like we don't sleep on Felix Rosenqvist. He's kind of that guy that's that overlooked part of that team right now because the offseason headlines were Alexander Rossi joins the team, Alex Pillow, he's coming, he's not coming, he's coming in the future. All eyes are on that, and we all know about Pato O'Ward already being there. But you got a really solid driver in Felix Rosenqvist. So this is a team that can really, I think, find their footing and find some good success. But it'll be interesting to watch how everything plays out with Ganassi Racing as well, with the different changes that they've made. I mean, we all know that Penske is going to be up there. There's no question about that. The only question you may have, can Scott McLaughlin take that next step this season? He was a race winner last year. He was very competitive last year. He started the season off extremely strong, almost had back-to-back wins if it wasn't for a last-second pass at Texas. So we know what's going to be, what that team's going to be like. And we can still kind of know what Ganassi is going to be like. They're going to bring a strong car to every track, every race. There's no doubt about it. But I think it's definitely going to be interesting to watch Arrow McLaren this year and how that team gels and see if they can now take that next step. Because you felt like that team has been on the cusp of moving up to that upper echelon of the team hierarchy. And now that they're starting to make those moves and everything's starting to kind of come into place for them, can they officially make that move up the hierarchy ladder, and put their name up there with the likes of Penske and Ganassi?
Now, talking about teams kind of, fading a little bit out of the limelight, one team that's kind of done that a little bit themselves is Andretti Autosport, because they've kind of fallen from what we saw in the early days of that team. But as far as my driver to watch, I think it's somebody that can potentially get them back some notoriety, get them back into the limelight a little bit. That's Kyle Kirkwood. That's my driver to watch going into 2023. He had a very forgettable rookie campaign. One top 10, finished 24th in points, driving for AJ Foyt. He's back with Andretti Autosport, where he won the Indy Lights Championship in 2021. He won 10 races, had 14 podiums, 18 top fives. With with Rossi gone and Colton Herta's long-term future with Andretti up in the air, to say the least, Andretti Autosport needs someone who can step up and kind of be the face of that team. And I mean, because I know they have Romain Grosjean, but I think Kyle Kirkwood could be the guy to make that next step for this team, be that younger kind of face of what the future of that team could look like. So I think Kyle Kirkwood is primed to have a breakout year this year.
Yeah, I'm keeping mine with my driver to watch out for, within that team as well, within Andretti Autosport. It's kind of a twofer, I guess. The two drivers I'm really watching. One, I'm watching Colton Herta because everybody knows he's eventually going to make that jump to Formula One, and it's not like it's the best kept secret. But if he really wants to make that jump and make everybody feel comfortable with him making that jump, I want to see more consistency out of him especially on the street courses. We know what he did last year at Indianapolis on the road course, in the rain. That really went a long way for him, looking at a future with F1. But I just felt like there was times where Colton Herta could just disappear on the tracks that really you kind of felt like where it could translate to how it's going to be in Formula One. So I want to see. I'm really watching him for consistency. I think a good thing for him is having a teammate like Romain Grosjean, who what has been a Formula One driver, knows what it takes to compete on that circuit. But I'm also watching him because last year we did see him become much more comfortable with this car, and we saw him be much more competitive, whether it was not just on street and road courses, but we saw him actually be competitive on ovals. And that was really kind of a cool thing to see. Somebody that really didn't have much oval experience prior to the IndyCar, really none. So I really want to see if he can take that next step, because if he can, that's huge for Andretti. If they, I mean, because we know Colton Herta is going to have his time and he's going to be competitive up there with everybody, but if they can have that second car that is competitive, that puts them back in the conversation with the top three, top four teams in IndyCar, really top three, because I would put them about top four
Yeah.
right now.
I'd say they're fourth. Out of four,
Yeah,
I
I
would
would
have
say
them
they're
fourth.
fourth. But it puts them in contention in the conversation to move up if they can get that consistency and get that second car to be competitive with Roman Grosjean this year. But so I'm really watching him, but I'm also watching Colton Herta to see how he can show us that he's capable of making that move, because it's not an easy move to Formula One. It's not, and if you are struggling, he's not consistently struggling, but like I want to see him be in consistent contention on street courses mostly.
Yep, for sure. So, final thing before we get into our predictions here, what race are you looking forward to the most? I'm just gonna go personal here. The schedule's roughly the same as it's been the last. I mean, it's the same as it was last year essentially, and normally I'm a big proponent of the Iowa races, and of course they're high up for me again this year. But the race I'm looking forward to the most is Texas. Last year was just classic Texas with the New Garden
Oh yeah.
Pass at the end, side by side finish. I've got a job that actually allows me to be off on weekends now. For this year's IndyCar season, it will be for a bulk of the year. Last year, I got
Aren't you
my.
lucky?
I know. I got my new job in September last year. So that was at the end of the IndyCar season. So I'm excited to actually have Sundays free, be able to watch some races, and the Texas race is the one I'm looking forward to the most.
What's going to be like a kick in the teeth for me is the fact that I will actually be like nearby that Texas race. As the
That's
Texas
true.
race is happening, I'm going to be in Dallas, but sitting in a basketball arena watching women's basketball, when I'd much rather be watching that Texas race with IndyCar. I mean Texas is an awesome one for sure. You know, it'd be easy to say St. Pete this weekend, because that first turn, when that flag drops green for the first time on the season and everybody goes barreling into turn one, you just kind of hold your breath, hold on tight, because uh, everybody's super aggressive, and at the same time got to race super smart there. But for me, I'm going with the Iowa doubleheader. I, that short track oval racing, Iowa, they make a huge weekend out of it. I mean, the concerts, the doubleheader racing. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that outside of obviously the month of May.
Right.
But I love short track racing, especially with IndyCar, because they can take that track and make it super exciting, super competitive. I really am looking forward to that. And it's a cool track. It's out in the middle of nowhere. When I was driving to Omaha last summer, it's just like you're driving through the fields of Iowa. There's nothing, and all of a sudden out rises this racetrack, and you're just like, wow, that is so cool. And I can't wait for that. I mean, obviously you got Worldwide Technology Raceway as well. That's an exciting one out there in St. Louis. But Iowa, it's probably one of my favorites. I mean, I don't know. It's hard. How can I pick one?
Right.
That's the thing,
It
because I'm like, oh man, Nashville's going to be exciting too, because that's a party. Everybody gets up for the Nashville race because it's in Nashville, and you get the people that are not really race fans there, and they become race fans, and that's the type of weekend you love to see as well. But the same thing can go for Iowa, because there's also a music fest going on at the same time, and you're just like, man, this is how you grow the sport,
yeah.
and I love that.
Yeah, we talked about it last year. A lot that we would like to see more ovals added to the schedule. I would love, because I think it's 17 races. I would love them to add three races. Make it an even 20 and go to three more ovals. Not to say, because I've grown. I used to be very staunchly like, I hate road courses, And now I mean now I love them. But I definitely want to see more ovals on the schedule because those races just really are. I mean, as exciting as the straight races can be sometimes, like the oval races are just that much more exciting. So it'll be fun to watch this season for sure. We're ready to get going. So before we get out of here, let's give our predictions. For the 2023 season, we're gonna give our prediction for Rookie of the Year, Dark Horse, Champion, and then of course who's gonna win this weekend at St. Pete. So I'll go ahead and run through my Rookie of the Year and Dark Horse. Then B Scott will go. Then we'll go back and forth for the champion and then the race winner this weekend. So, my Rookie of the Year prediction. Pretty simple here. Not a whole lot of thought went into this. When you've got a guy in the sport and his name is Stingray Robb, you can't go anywhere else than
Yes.
that. You can't go anywhere
No.
else. He finished second Indy Lights points last season, but even if he didn't, he could have finished freaking last in Indy Lights points last year, and I would have been all aboard the Stingray Robb train. So give me Stingray Robb as my Rookie of the Year. You can't go against him. As far as my dark horse for the championship, give me Alexander Rossi. We talked about it a little bit last season. I think the win at IMS gives him some momentum after a long winless streak. He's got a change of scenery with a team that's on the up and up in IndyCar, beginning to stake their claim as one of the better teams in the sport. It wasn't that long ago. It seems like forever ago because of the pandemic, but it was only 2019 that he was in contention for a title. And I think change of scenery, getting that win under his belt, so he's not like, because I mean, I think after a while, I know Rossi's is about as stoic as you can get, but you still wonder if that plays into your head a little bit when you go to
Oh,
if
you
you
saw the emotion come
right.
out when he won that. He won at the road course at Indy last August. I
Because
mean,
had he gone
that was
into
a huge weight lifted off his
because
shoulders.
had he gone into Arrow McLaren and continued that winless streak for 1, 2, 3, 5 races after going so long without a win with Andretti, then you start creeping those thoughts in of like, oh, maybe it wasn't them, maybe it was me, so it can be rough. So, the fact that he's got that out, he's on a team that's on the up and up. I think Alexander Rossi is going to be real tough to beat this year.
Yeah, I mean that's a great pick right there. So, Stingray Robb, where would you place him on the in the rankings of best sports name?
Oh, best sports name. I'm
I
not
mean, racing, obviously, he's right up there with Scott Speed.
Godspeed, yes. There's because there's even a Lake Speed, isn't there too? There's like a Lake Speed and a Scott Speed. Lake Speed is a
Yeah.
deep cut for NASCAR because he used to race the Cartoon Network car back in the day.
Oh yeah.
Um,
I mean, there's some names that just fit with a sport,
yeah,
like Bubba Wallace. I don't know why, but I feel like he's just like that's like the epitome of like a NASCAR name.
that's a NASCAR name, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's several names. I'm not great on the spot, so I'm trying to think, and of course, I'm going blank right now. But yeah, I mean, as far as like, I mean, it's got to
Or
be
like because
it's
there's
top five or
like
top
Purdue,
three for sure.
former Purdue tight end from like the past few years, Payne Durham.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
you can't do anything else but play football. Like you can't, you know, or maybe fight, but be like an MMA fighter or something. But you got to do something.
yeah, I know there's a quarterback that's coming up through the high school ranks, and his name is Air. I forget his last name, but his that's his nickname. His real name is like Prentice. Um, it's a family name, but he goes by Air, and it's like, oh wow, that's kind of perfect for a quarterback. Um, so yeah, back on topic. My rookie, it. You look at all these rookies, it's tough. I think Stingray Robb, I think has a good shot at it, but I'm going to go with Marcus Armstrong mostly because of the equipment that he's going to be running. Um, he's gonna have Ganassi equipment underneath him. He's gonna be running alongside with Scott Dixon. He's gonna be running alongside um, Marcus Erickson, Alex Pillow, and he's gonna be sharing a ride with Takuma Sato. I mean, you got all the necessary resources there for you to grow as a driver. Um, so I kind of look for him to have that a good rookie year. I mean, it's going to be tough for him. I feel like because he is going to be splitting races with Takuma Sato, so that could work against him. But at the same time, I mean, we've seen a lot of rookies have done that. So I don't know. I'm going with Marcus Armstrong though. my dark horse, I am going with Penske driver Scott McLaughlin. Um, like I said earlier, he started the season off last year strong. He showed, I mean, he's a champion driver to begin with. He's just one of those guys you put him behind the wheel of any type of car, and he's going to be competitive. He's, it seems like every series has one of those types of guys. And he is one of those types of drivers that he just knows how to drive a car. Um, I think you're going to start seeing him take that next step again this year. He took the step last year to be competitive, it was more comfortable, but I think now this year he can find himself in contention more so. I mean, it's hard to say he wasn't in contention last year with a top 5 finish, but I think he could be up there closer into like the top 3 even um, for championship contention.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, especially with Penske behind him. I mean, there's really no limit to what he could potentially do. That brings us to our championship pick here. For me, my championship pick, over the last 10 seasons, the champion has either been Ganassi or Penske, which is really weird. Like, I just hadn't thought about that. Like, we talked about it before we started
It's
recording. Like, I was like, it didn't occur to me that because there's been so many other contenders over the years that you're thinking, oh, well, surely somebody, because I always forget that Rossi hasn't won one. So like you would have thought somewhere along the lines, but nope, it's been Penske Ganassi. And I've got a more of a hunch for back-to-back titles for Penske. And I'm really torn between McLaughlin and Newgarden. Newgarden had a win in 3 top 5s in the last 5 races last season, finished the year strong, second in points. McLaughlin had a win in 4 top 5s in the last 5 races. He finished 4th in points. He took a big step forward last season, like you mentioned. And if it weren't for a crash at the second Iowa race that Newgarden dominated, I mean, who knows if he wins the championship instead of Will Power, because he came on so strong at the end of the year. I feel like when we do these, I always pick either Joseph Newgarden or Scott Dixon. I feel like that's always where I end up. But I feel like the what ifs from last year and being so close to another title. I mean, you could kind of hear it. I mean, I remember saying this after the IndyCar season ended last year. Like, it just feels like Newgarden was ticked off. He really felt like, man, if another outcome here, another outcome there, we're the champion. And that's what I think drives him going into this season. And also tying it all back perfectly to the beginning. We talked about drivers over 30 winning 7 of the last titles. He's 32. So give me Joseph Newgarden. He's my championship pick for 2023.
so Yeah, I mean, this is so wide open. It's so wide open. But I'm actually going to say the streak of Ganassi and Penske winning stops this year. Um, this is a driver I've talked about a lot, and I'm going with him as my champion. He's going to be a first time champion, and that is Arrow McLaren's Alexander Rossi. I think getting that race win last year at Indy back in August, that like I said, that was a huge weight lifted off his shoulders. And I think now he's got that monkey off his back. Been back in victory lane. He's got the McLaren speed underneath him. I mean, it's game on now. I think we're going to see the Alexander Rossi of old, super competitive driver, a driver that's going to give it everything he's got week in and week out. And I honestly believe Alexander Rossi comes home as the champion this year.
That's a good pick. I mean, I think Alexander Rossi is going to have a breakout year. I didn't feel confident enough in picking him as a champion because, that's why he's my dark horse, but I'm glad that you did because he's going to have a really good year. And finally, wrapping things up here, we're going to predict the race this weekend at St. Pete, who we think is going to win the race. It's going to be a good one. Penske, talked about Penske. We'll keep beating that drum. Penske has dominated this race, winning 6 of the last 10 at St. Pete. We've seen drivers go back-to-back at St. Pete 3 times during that stretch. I didn't go with McLaughlin to win the title, so give me Scott McLaughlin to win this race. Since I couldn't give him the title, I'll give him the race win at St. Pete. I think Scott McLaughlin starts the year off exactly how he started last year with a win at St. Petersburg.
I'm going to go with the guy that was right on McLaughlin's gearbox last year at the end of that race, and that is Alex Palou. I think Alex Palou comes out of the gate hot this year and picks up the win at St. Pete this weekend.
I think that would be interesting too, because I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it could just be me playing it up, but I think the whole contract thing is going to be could be a potential distraction, or just kind of a source of weirdness. But what I think cures that is winning. So if you can start off the year with a win, I mean,
Yeah,
I think it kind of goes back to business as usual for that team. So that's a good pick. I like that.